Hello, this is Joe Folkman and Jack Zenger. We're going to talk today about what makes leaders innovative, and I'm very excited about this webinar. First, as we've gone through it, I've learned a lot, but more importantly, as Jack and I have talked about some of these concepts, we see how this applies to our very business. So, Jack, a lot of
yes, absolutely.
we're sort of saying, we need to do that.
It's caused us to reflect.
Yeah. So as we think about this webinar and we think about the question of innovation, we'd like to start off with a poll. And as you think about the importance of innovation in your organization, where would you place this one topic? One of the top 10 issues, one of the top 5 issues, one of the top 3 issues, or the number one issue in your business? And you can see on the right side of your screen there's a place for you to weigh in on that. We're really excited to understand how this issue places. I suspect it might be a little self-selection. People that think it's not important at all are probably not. They didn't.
Not on this call.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you. The votes are coming in. It actually is interesting. A few people, not many, have said it's the number one issue in their business. But we've got about a 25% in the top 3, and it looks like about 28% in the top 5. All in all, it looks to me like there's about 80% of the respondents here that would say it's one of the top issues, and even more than the top 10. That's impressive. We actually did a little exercise, and we had 700,000 respondents here, but we had people rate the importance of innovation against 15 other competencies. And it was interesting where it came out. It was not in the top 5. It was actually 13 of the 16. And does that surprise you, Jack?
Yeah, and Joe, what it seems to me is what the problem it raises, or the question it raises, is whether this is important for the organization, but not necessarily important for every manager. So because these are aggregate scores for all leaders, it looks like it's maybe it's down here in the number 13 position. But as an organizational issue, it may be higher than that.
Well, and you can see that actually 15% of managers rate it as one of the top 4 issues,
right,
and 17% of peers. So for at least 15% of the population, this becomes a very important issue. What's interesting as you think about this whole importance of innovation, even though it's not considered one of the top organizational issues or management issues, it is a really important issue in organizations. And it's possible that when we look at those importance rankings, people focus on the immediate, what you need to do today. It's not got a longer view around it always.
So let's show you some data about how people perceive this issue of innovation. So in terms of measuring their overall effectiveness, leaders' effectiveness is in 10th place. You can see on this chart how it compares to the other competencies that we measure. If you then, though, compare the individual's self-ratings on innovation, you see that it goes to an even higher level. They place this as that they see themselves as being more innovative than their managers, which is the next rating. Managers see them as being lower. They're in the 12th place. So, what do you make of this, Joe? I mean, you're the statistician here.
Well, it's if you look at the both elements, it's not rated as very important. Right. And in terms of people's effectiveness at doing it, it's not, managers aren't rated as having a tremendous amount of skill around their ability to manage innovation.
Right.
that brings up this interesting point.
Yeah, so Clayton Christensen, who is the Harvard Business School professor who's wrote the book called The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution and The Innovator's DNA, he's made I think the very profound observation that unsuccessful companies put great emphasis on current customers' needs, and they don't effectively look at what about the future. They don't worry about the future technology or the necessary business models to meet customers' needs tomorrow. In many ways, our data supports Christensen's assumptions. As you look at those things that we're currently good on, it is things like taking initiative and driving for results and being technically expert. But those aren't necessarily the things that will drive innovation in the future. So our basic conclusion is that if innovation is indeed one of the most important issues for an organization, then more and more leaders are going to need to be able to kind of learn the methods and the necessary behaviors for being more innovative.
And hence why we're doing this webinar, because we think it's more important than it's rated, and we think the skill level is not as great as it should be. And so as a leader, if you feel like innovation is critical in your organization, well, this webinar is for you. What we did to understand this whole issue is we looked at distribution of all leaders that we had in our database on innovation, and then we looked at those in the top 10%, those in the very best that were the most innovative. And the question was, what are these people doing that other people aren't? What's happening here? And how do they go about it? And it is so funny. I talked to somebody the other day, and they said they sat down with their manager, and they said, I want to be more innovative. And the manager looked at him and said, well, just innovate.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's the how part that really gets you into trouble. And so let's look at that. Let's describe the study, because we did a little more than that. We actually did the analysis on the data, and then we did a very detailed research project where we went into one organization and looked at those at the 99th percentile. These were the leaders that were amazing innovators in this organization. And it's a large organization. It's about 200,000 employees. What we decided to do was to interview, and Jack, you and I both did these interviews where we interviewed the manager and then a selection of their direct reports all together on the phone.
Yeah.
And what we did is we collected examples from both the leader and from those on the phone to validate this about what that leader was doing to really build this culture of innovation. And that combined with our database of 52,000 leaders where we did the analysis that we've just shown you, we identified these 10 factors that really drive innovation. And these are the 10 factors. We're going to go through them on the webinar and talk about each one of these, but we'll give you some ideas about how these connect to innovation and the key factors that they drive. The number one factor, and one that we feel quite strongly about, is strategic vision. Now, McDonald's many years ago had this interesting tactic that really had a substantial increase in sales, and it was called suggestive selling. And you might have noticed that when you went into McDonald's, you'd place an order, and they'd say something, would you like fries with that? That's the famous
You want the
line.
full meal.
Yeah, or meal. Yeah. How about a pie or a drink? That's suggestive selling, and while that may be annoying to you, the data on that was really profound in terms of how much sales that drove. It really drove up sales. Now, if you think about that approach, think about what Amazon does. I did a search for the exceptional leader in Amazon, and then what it brings up is customers who bought this, also bought, and what I'm excited about is it lists all our other books.
All the other books, that's right. And we encourage that.
That is a bit, you really need them all. But it also listed some other things too, and somebody else's book. And if you go down that, it's interesting. Recently, I was with a client, and they told me that they'd implemented something very similar to this in their organization. It's a different product, but basically people were purchasing something, and they just did the same thing where they did that thing where again, the database said that people who bought this also bought that. They said that increased their second product purchases from 3% to 6%. The net result of that was millions of dollars in revenue.
Wow.
And what it started them to do is think about what they were all about. Because they had started by saying, we sell content. We sell content. That's what we sell. And the more content, the better. But as they thought about it, they thought about this idea, if they know who you are, and if they know what you purchased in the past, and if they look at data of millions of people purchasing similar products, and if they know your social network, who you interface with, who you talk to, who your friends are, they might know what you want before you do.
Scary.
It is scary. And so as you think about that strategy, that really changed their point of view about what their product was. That strategy can really help you in your organization. And clearly, we've seen so many people take a strategy and really use that strategy to grow a market and really change the distribution. Yeah. So innovative leaders, they have a clear vision. Innovative leaders ask the question, is there a better way? They formulate a vision for the future. They share the vision with others. The vision is an aspiration that can't be achieved through incremental improvements. And I love that because, again, if we work harder, well, it's not going to make it. We've got to find a different way to do it. And innovation becomes a necessary part of the process to really create that vision. As we thought about that and as we looked at the problems in organization from using a strategic perspective and using innovative thoughts, I mean, part of the problem is how busy people are. So let me start by asking you a question. How many of you have, at this point in your work life, a little more work than you can do? And if we were raising hands, I'd imagine every hand was raised. I ask that to groups all the time, and everybody feels like they're overwhelmed. And again, if people can barely keep their heads above water, if they're so busy, there just doesn't feel like there's room for innovation. It's like, oh, I can just barely meet it. And yet that innovation could very well, make their life a lot easier if they figured out a better way to do it. So that's the point here around the innovation.
Okay, element number 2 of our research showed that highly innovative leaders had an extraordinarily strong customer focus. They really paid attention to what the customer truly wanted. For example, when you check into a hotel, what is really important to you in a hotel? I can tell you what I care about when I check into a hotel. I care about where it is and that it's reasonably accessible. I care about being able to check in quickly and not being delayed at the front desk. I want to make sure that there's a true rock-solid reservation there and not just a myth.
The theoretical reservation.
The theoretical reservation, right. I like to be able to check out quickly, and it's not nice when they put the check under the door for me in the middle of the night, so I don't need to kind of search around for it. And anyway, you can see on this list of some things that are important to me when it comes to what do I want in a hotel. If a hotel understands that about me, then they can efficiently and cost-effectively provide that to me, and they can get me to be a customer for life. Now, it's nice if they give me some extra points and if they give me a bottle of water and they treat me special because I'm a frequent flyer with them. But having a strong customer focus allows you to really, build this understanding of what customers truly need. So if you don't know what your customers are wanting and needing, then you don't know how they really use your product. You won't know why they might like your competitor's product more than they like yours. They won't know how the product makes you as a customer more successful. So you can just see on this chart a few of the things that we think firms miss when they don't take the time to really get inside the customer's mind, understand how he or she thinks, and particularly how they use the product.
It's amazing, Jack. I put one example on there. My zucchini got this powdery mildew on it, and it kills the zucchini, and I like my zucchini, so I went to the store and I bought this stuff. It cost over $10 for a bottle of this spray. It didn't last that long. It didn't do a great job, and I was reading on the internet that baking soda
does the same thing.
And it costs almost 2 cents for the same amount. I don't know if the people that make baking soda know this, but this is a great advertising. But they probably do. But I don't know. They're probably saying it's the wrong thing to use. But I found it worked really well. And again, knowing your customers is critical. Well, another element is we found this climate of reciprocal trust. So as you think about innovation and you think about, well, what kills innovation? If people try to be innovative and they make a mistake, right, and then you get punished for it, that pretty much reduces all innovation. I used to work with an organization, and the CEO used to always said it on a regular basis, we're just not making enough mistakes. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he would say, well, we are not pushing the envelope. I want to push the envelope. I really want to try some things differently. And as you think about that attitude, that's the attitude. So we found that really innovative managers, they had the backs of their subordinate. I think we heard that several times, Jack.
Yeah, that was one of the very profound messages in these interviews that we conducted, where the subordinates would talk about this level of trust that existed between them and the manager. And that was one of the most kind of overwhelming conclusions and messages we heard from those interviews.
People are not dumb. And if you punish them for making a mistake, then they're going to do what's safe. But we found that in these most innovative managers, they really encourage people to push the envelope. They had their backs. If the mistake was made, they wouldn't get blamed for it. It's interesting that when you look at the correlations between innovation and trust, we found that trust does have a significant positive impact on innovation, but interestingly enough, we found that innovation does not necessarily increase trust. Mm-hmm. And what happens is that in an innovative environment, things are changing. Things are kind of, it's not as consistent. And so you have this funny thing occurring where when people really are innovative, the trust tends to be lower. But in order to get real innovation, you need real trust. So it's this funny combination.
Okay, our fourth insight from the research that we did was that these extraordinarily innovative leaders were characterized by a fearless loyalty to doing what was right for the organization and what was right for the customer. And repeatedly we heard from their subordinates, this person is not afraid to push back on the hierarchy. This person is willing to tackle any difficult issue. This person is willing to disagree with higher levels in the organization. You hear these, fearless kind of ability to always address issues that sometimes were kind of in the bailiwick of some other department or some outside organization. If it was falling in the crack, they stepped into it. And so this quality of not being afraid to attack the big elephant in the room was very, very consistent.
I was in Amsterdam last week, and we jumped on a tram early in the morning, and on a stop a few stops ahead, the CEO popped on the tram. It was just completely by accident, right? And I'd never met him, and my colleague that was sitting by me said, there's the CEO. And I said, well, let's say hi. He said, what? So I went up to him and said hi. We had a great conversation, but I mean, that's an interesting example of where sometimes people are a little afraid to reach out and even ask questions of senior leaders.
Some of the interesting comments that we heard from people, we've just made a list here, and you might just kind of enjoy hearing what a few of them were. One of them was, he always asks, why can't it be done? Another person said, we try never to say no when a customer requests something or when some other department requests something of us. Frequently, we heard comments about, he was always willing to push up, against the upper management, or she takes on the difficult issues and does the dirty work with senior executives. She is fearless. So these comments about how their behavior was kind of inverse to the environment, I love that one. That they, the more prestigious the person, the more willing they were to kind of, take them on and push back. And finally, if we're not getting our hands slapped, we're not pushing hard enough. That was just the general sentiment. And one of the questions that came up was, can you push too far? And we've kind of summarized this person's response to that. We asked that question, can you push too far? And the leader's answer was, it's just not possible. There is so much inertia in this organization. It pulls us back and keeps us from challenging the really difficult problems. It will never happen. And that kind of just summarizes this quality of loyalty to the organization and to the customer. So in summary, don't get the impression that these people were rebels. Don't get the impression that they were disrespectful. That wasn't true. They were simply very willing to challenge difficult issues in order to present the best possible solution for the client.
And I think this is a rare quality. I was in an organization recently where the CEO had created a document and people didn't really understand it. It was hard. And I said, can we just change the wording? And everybody said, no. And yet I almost guarantee that if I sat down with the CEO and asked him, he would have said, sure. If it's not clear, let's make it clear. But nobody was willing to go and ask the question. And again, in an innovative environment, we find this is a significant quality. Another thing is this culture that magnifies upwards communication. So in a command and control organization, it's top down. And most of the communication comes from the top, goes to the bottom. And in an innovative organization, we find lots of communication flowing up the organization from the bottom. What's interesting is I hope we have an innovative organization here. But boy, we get a lot of communication.
We do get a lot of communication. That's true.
And I would say that you don't always want to hear it.
Unfettered. That's right. That's true.
But it is great because when you do get that kind of communication, oftentimes it's not filtered or made politically correct. It tends to be very raw. And it's from people who have direct contact with the customer. And so often as you move to higher levels in the organization, you become disconnected from that. It can impact efficiency and bureaucracy. and that can really affect. People can see the impacts of inefficiency, and oftentimes good ideas come from everywhere in the organization. If you limit the number of people who can have an idea or can suggest an idea, what you're doing is significantly reducing the possibility of coming up with a great idea.
Yeah, and I think it was many years ago that Toyota concluded that the great majority of their good process improvement ideas always came from under, the bottom of the organization. Didn't come from the engineers and didn't come from the management. It came from the workers.
Yeah.
The next thing we learned was and heard from our interviews and looking at our data was that these highly innovative people were extremely concerned about recruiting the very best people. They made comments like, you sabotage yourself when you go for second best people. And so don't want to belabor this too much, but just the idea that having a high standard of who you recruit, who you bring in, seemed to be characteristic of those people who really excelled at innovation.
Well, the seventh issue is stretch goals and targets. So if you set a 5% increase on productivity or a 10% cost reduction, you can accomplish that. You can just work a little harder, spend a little less. And it doesn't push you to innovate. It doesn't push the assumptions. But when you say we're going to double our productivity or we're going to cut our costs in half, that's when you have to have innovation. Stretch targets can be a great example of that. And Jack, I remember when we were at the Gap a couple of years ago, and we were talking to their supply chain, the manager of their supply chain. He had managed to reduce the cost of materials in the last 5 years, cut it in half. And that's in a period of inflation.
Both transportation and materials.
Yeah. And it was incredible what he did. And we kept asking, how did you do this? Did you just force people to do it? Did you set draconian goals or something like that? And he said, and it was interesting, he just kept saying, I know we can do better. I know there's more there. I know we can reduce that. Instead of being satisfied with small improvement, he just kept saying, I know we can do better. And I think that was a really good example to me that sometimes stretch goals is just continuing to push the envelope and ask for more and ask people, is there more juice in that lemon?
The eighth thing we found from this research was a very consistent emphasis on speed. Now, I think we all know that we live in a fast-paced world, and we know that it seems to be accelerating. This is best kind of maybe illustrated by the data that's on this chart that shows that, how long did it take a new technology to reach its first 50 million users? And in the case of radio, it took 38 years. In the case of TV, 13 years, and internet, 4 years, iPod, 3, and then Facebook gets down to 2.
2 years.
And so you see this kind of just dramatic acceleration of speed. What is striking? There's a wonderful new book out called The Innovator's Method. It's written by a couple of professors, a fellow named Nathan Furr and Jeff Dyer. And in this book, they document the procedure, the process of innovation. And it begins with a good idea, and then it's sort of understanding a customer's needs that are not currently being met. But one of the things that they particularly put emphasis on is this notion of how do you quickly get answers to the question of, is this going to really truly satisfy a customer? And so rather than the old kind of MBA approach of show me all of your analysis, all the data you've collected, all the studies you've done, all the market research you've done, That's what used to be the question. Now the question is, what's the fastest way to conduct an experiment that would test that idea? And this whole notion of kind of rapid prototyping is certainly just a major, kind of transformation in what organizations are doing when it comes to being more innovative. Many of us on the call probably are either use or are very familiar with Google's Gmail. How long do you think it took them to kind of come up with the prototype for Gmail? And the answer,
like months, wouldn't it?
you would think it would be a long period of time, and in reality, it took one day. Now let's take a much more complicated product. A lot of you maybe are familiar with this thing that they call Google Glass, which is this device that you can wear, which allows you to not have to kind of take your eyes away from your cell phone or from your computer, but lets you kind of interact with the internet, and the internet projects. You have it projected onto your vision through this pair of glasses, live images. Now, just think for a moment about the complexity of that product, and just think about making the first prototype of that product that would prove that the idea was viable and then what it might look like, how it might work. And so just for a moment reflect on how long you think it would take an organization to come up with the prototype for that product.
I'm thinking a long time.
And the answer is it took one day. And I think that whole notion of speedy experiments being a huge key to successful innovation is really a powerful one. Joe, I know that you looked inside of our database and you looked at the items that we have that measure kind of this quality of acting swiftly and being concerned about speed, and you saw some of the behaviors that were correlated with that. You might just kind of review what they were.
It was interesting, Jack. We had 3 items that really measured speed. It quickly makes decisions, will make changes quickly, early, solves problems before they become an issue. Yeah. And then I looked at that and I sort of said, well, what do people do to kind of create speed? What do leaders do to create a speedy environment? One is that they built trust that others have in their judgment and their ability.
And that trust seemed to come from them being willing to explain and clearly convey the underlying reasons for decisions that they make.
Right. But you can imagine that if people didn't trust your judgment, making a speedy decision
doesn't go
well. And so if people don't trust your judgment, you may have to get people with you that they do trust their judgment, and again, building that capacity for people to trust your judgment. The second thing is the strategic vision. If you're not clear about where you're headed, it's going to be your speed of decisions. But if you're absolutely 100% clear about where we're going, how to get there, and I think this is also important, clear about where we're not going.
Yeah, exactly.
Clear about what we don't do. I think I have as many dilemmas about what not to do as what to do.
Yeah, we all do.
But when you're clear about that, you can make a speedy decision. When you're not clear, so strategic clarity is the second one. The third thing is a personal issue, which is courage. It's risky to make a speedy decision. And it's always going to be more risky than waiting and looking and analyzing. People without the courage and the willingness to take risks have a difficult time doing that. If those who had more expertise or knowledge or were able to assemble it, were able to make decisions quicker. And then another thing that helped was, again, stretch goals. Having a stretch goal. If you don't have a stretch goal, then you have all the time in the world.
That's right.
If you have a stretch goal, then you better get to it quickly. Yeah. So let's talk about the next one, which is candid communication. When we looked at that data, we found 2 themes that were very prevalent. One is the ability to keep people well informed, keep them on the same page, keep them up to date. That usually involves talking. But the other one that was just as important was listening. And it wasn't just about tell. It was about listen. And we did a little interesting experiment where we looked at those two factors, and we measured a person's ability to keep others informed and their ability to listen. And we looked at if you were good at keeping people informed but not at listening, there was a 13% chance you might be at the 90th percentile on Innovates. Now, if you were good at listening but not good at keeping people well informed, it was actually a 10% chance. So it looks like keeping people well informed is a better thing, but when people did both together, there was actually a 65% chance of them being in the top 10% on their ability to innovate. That just makes the point about what we're saying is that both of these skills are important, and I think the one that gets overlooked is listening.
Yeah.
And I remember a few months ago, you came back from a session you gave on the East Coast, Jack, and you said to me, "People don't know how to listen."
Always comes as a shock after. All right, the 10th and last factor that seemed to be very characteristic of these people who were so good at being innovative was that they had this quality of providing a level of motivation and inspiration to the people around them. And one of the people we were talking to said, innovation just doesn't happen. It occurs because people are highly motivated and they're inspired to create something new, something different, something better. And so innovation occurs in this climate of motivation and inspiration that the leader kind of creates within the group. And so the keys to creating that inspiring and motivating climate is the ability that the leader has to make some personal and an emotional connection with their colleagues. Now, we don't believe this is a behavior to be learned, but it's certainly an outcome that you want to have produced. It's sufficiently important that it almost becomes a category of its own, because emotions are so contagious. But indeed, the attitude, the optimism, the buoyancy of the leader just radiates to the people around her or him. And Joe, I know you wanted to tell a story about your wife giving you this little assignment about some project that she had in mind.
So I'm home, hot. Well, it was an early spring day, and my wife came to the door and she said, "Can you come outside?" And I said, "No." I know, this is Saturday. I'm not going to walk. Anyway, she said, "Please come outside." So I came outside, and then she looked at the hedge, and she said, "Look at that." And I said, "It's a hedge." And she said, "It's an ugly hedge. It's an eyesore. It looks terrible." And I said, by August, it'll look fine." And she said, "We really need to pull that out. It's a real eyesore. I hate it. I can't stand it. And you need to get your son and teach him how to work." And I said, "That's not a great idea." So I got my son, and we're sitting on the porch, and we're looking at a pick and a shovel. Now, that's not an inspirational sight. And my son is saying to me, "This is a really bad idea, Dad. This is a dumb idea. We don't want to do this." And I go, "I know, but I don't have a choice." And at that point, my wife drives out of the driveway and blows kisses. And, "Oh, gosh, we got to do it, buddy." So as we're sitting there griping at each other about how hard this is going to be and how much work it's going to be and how tough it's going to be, all of a sudden, I have a vision. And my vision is my pickup truck. I have this old truck, and I don't care what happens to it. And as I had that vision, I thought about the pickup truck, and then I thought about my trusty tow rope. And I looked at my son, and I said, so Corbin, Let's say we get the truck and we pull it, we back it up, and then we get that tow rope and hook it around the bumper, and then we wrap it around those shrubs and we just rip them out. And my son looks at me and said, that'd be fun. Well, this is a really hard piece of work. It's boring. But when we mixed innovation with it, right, it took it from the worst possible work you could ever do to fun.
Yeah.
It was still a lot of work. And I won't talk about the damage we did. But it was a lot of fun. And again, one of the things that I've learned about innovation is it can be very inspiring. And using innovation really helps you to become a more inspiring leader.
So as we look at this list of 10 characteristics or qualities of highly innovative leaders, we hope maybe that one or two of them have struck you if you're currently a manager in an organization. Maybe a couple of them have struck you as things that you might want to experiment with, might want to do even better. For those of you who are in the business of developing leaders, we think that this provides a very useful checklist of how you can, as an organization, increase the level of innovation amongst your managerial ranks. To learn more, you can evaluate your leader's ability to provide innovation, along with many of the factors that we measure on our 360-degree feedback instrument, which really help give you some further ideas about how to increase innovation and thereby increase the overall effectiveness of your leaders.
Well, good luck on innovating. This has been a fun webinar to do, Jack, and we have actually some great ideas about what we could do.
We've thought about some things. You bet.
Thank you so much.